Good evening, everybody. Thank you for coming. My name is Stephanie Sirkovich. I'm the president of the League of Women Voters of Seattle-King County. Please settle in, get yourself some cake. Happy birthday to the League, which turns 98 on Valentine's Day. Let's give a hand to the League of Women Voters. I'm going to turn it over really quickly because everybody else has many more interesting things to say than I do tonight. But I do want to make a pitch for our TRI. They represent you, the Directory of Elected Officials. We have several extras in the back if you'd like to take some with you on your way out tonight. I'm looking forward to tonight's program. I'm going to turn it over to the wonderful Nikki Hurley, who is the co-chair of our Social Justice Committee and has breathed a lot of new life into the League of Women Voters, her and Melissa Taylor. So thank you for all your work to put this together tonight, and here you go.
Thank you, Stephanie. Well, again, thank you and welcome to the February Forum for the League of Women Voters, Seattle-King County. This forum is Budgets as Moral Documents. I hope you're all in the right place and nothing is surprising you tonight. As Stephanie mentioned, it is the League's birthday, so please make sure you grab cake. If you are a regular forum goer, you will notice that we don't have cookies. I'm sorry, but I think the cake is more than enough to make up for it. So I just wanted to introduce our wonderful, wonderful moderator tonight, Reverend Harriet Walden. She has been a vocal advocate for better police community relations in Seattle since 1990, when she co-founded Mothers for Police Accountability, which educates young people, parents, and others affected by excessive police practices, and works with other community organizations to seek positive changes in the criminal justice system. Additionally, she founded the Family Empowerment Institute, where she acts as director, working in partnership with the Seattle Police and Parks Department to break the silence on black crime. In 2000, Reverend Walden received a certificate of appreciation from the Seattle Police Chief. Since 1992, Reverend Walden has served as a trained facilitator for the Virtues Project, which sounds amazing, which is a global grassroots initiative to inspire the practices of virtues such as kindness, justice, and integrity in everyday life. And she was most recently the interim pastor of Sojourner Truth Ministries, a community service-based faith community in Seattle's central area. Finally, of all of her many accomplishments, Reverend Walden has been appointed to numerous task forces and commissions involving efforts to improve and heal community police relations and to achieve greater transparency and accountability in the criminal justice reform. So, thank you so much for being here, Reverend Walden. I'm going to turn it over to you and our wonderful panelists if you want to come on up and take a seat.
Come right on.
We have cards. We have cards on your seats. We will have a Q&A portion. So please, as questions pop into your brain that you want to discuss, please write them down and we'll come around to collect. Also, please turn off your cell phones, silence them. We don't want any embarrassing ringing tonight. Thank you.
All right. Well, thank you all for being here on a rainy night. It's not a rainy night in Georgia. I can't say that. But it is a rainy night in Seattle. So thank you for being here. I'm going to just get right started, and I'm going to, the panelists are there introducing themselves, so I'll just go to my right and let you introduce yourself.
Thank you. So my name is Jackie Vaughn, and I'm the organizing director for the All In for Washington campaign. We're a long-term campaign focused on flipping our state's upside-down tax code currently. Right now, those who make the least in our state pay the most, and those who make the most pay the least. And so we're working on a long-term campaign where we would flip that so that we have more revenue that's collected from better places to invest in communities.
All right.
My name's Kirsten Harris-Talley. I'm a local activist, political strategist, and I'm also the program director of the Progress Alliance of Washington, which does funding and strategic advisement around progressive political wins and change and social change in Washington State. I also was recently appointed to serve when Position 8 opened up, when then Councilmember Tim Burgess was elevated to Mayor Tim Burgess, I served 51 days on the City Council and brought my work and community to the city budget process during that time. So thank you for having me tonight.
Good evening. My name is Sheila Capestany, and I am King County Strategic Advisor for Children and Youth. And I am also the lead for Best Starts for Kids, which is a $400 million 6-year levy that the voters passed in November of 2015. I have a background as well in community organizing, community activism, and have spent a good part of my career working on all issues that impact children, youth, families, and birthing people.
All right, thank you. Our topic, of course, is about a moral budget, and when I was asked to moderate, I was thinking about, wow, I'm not sure I've seen a moral budget in my lifetime. I mean, you know, I grew up in the time of Hidden Figures, if you saw that movie. No resources came back to the community. They were just taxed, and no resources came back to the community. And so, and then I went to find out, when was the first word, when was the time that moral budget was used? And it was introduced by the late Dr. Reverend Martin Luther King as it related to the Vietnam War. And one of the things that he said is that we're spending, so much money for the war, is that actually it's going to be almost wound the soul of America. Is that we were headed toward a wounded soul, and so that was many, many years ago. So we're headed. I think we might have reached that point. And then in 1963, on the March on Washington, he said that, that they were coming because the United States government had given the Negro a bad check, and it was a non-sufficient funds, and it came to collect. So we talk about a moral budget, and so I think it's been an evolution that some money goes back to the community these days. But the gentry seem to always get the most of the money. And so I'm really interested tonight to hear the discussion and maybe your questions about a moral budget, because I'm sure next week people are going to be looking at their paychecks to see if they got a tax increase, and all of that, to see how all that fits into a moral budget. So I am going to just go right to the questions here with the lovely panel. And it is a panel of all women. Did you notice that? Yeah. Is there women power here? Is it women power? Yeah. All right, then. So, yeah. So let's give a clap to women power. All right. Give a clap to women power. There's an old saying that says there's an old saying that when the world is in trouble, God calls up women. So anyway, women have been called up. So with that, I go to the first question, and it says, what is your background working with budgets?
I'm going to take this out of this stand. My career path has been a bit unusual. And I've worked many years in nonprofits, and the beauty of working in nonprofit work is you get to do a little bit of everything and wear a lot of different hats, sometimes at the same time. So my first interaction with budgets, I was 21 years old. I was hired at a local organization, at the time led by a black woman. I was very lucky early in my career to have a black woman as a boss who really empowered me to take initiative and get involved and try new things. And I just started as an office assistant to start, but very quickly realized I want to know more about how do you make a budget? How does this come together? How do you make determinations with the dollars? And at the time, we did a lot of work with direct government funding, mostly through the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention. And so then from there, started doing grant writing, which is very common and needed in nonprofit work. But over time, that really evolved into roles I would have in directorships in nonprofits. And what was interesting is when I was appointed to the city council, a certain lens in the appointment process. They did an open appointment process. 16 people applied for the appointment, including Nick Licata, who has a huge legacy in how he managed and had been the chair of the budget committee process many times. And the consideration there that was very interesting, certainly I'd never balanced a $5.6 billion budget, but really the skills that come from a personal life of balancing a checkbook and keeping a family of 4 sustained in this city, and what it was to have worked in really what are extraordinarily complex budgets. And really, this idea of morality in that moment comes up a lot of time in nonprofits because you're forced through scarcity to have to prioritize, and there's always a mission. And what is morality but our values, and what is our mission but our values and action in that work? So that's where my experience came from, has really been from working community in nonprofits and what it is to have to make, at times, extraordinarily tough choices with those types of budgets.
Do you have any thoughts about budget as a moral document?
Yes, I do. It's interesting, the language of morality, and I always come back to a piece around values. I have always thought of budget processes, and I think it's because of my orientation to budgets and how I came into doing budgets, that they always are a statement of values. And I would hope that is always a lens that those decisions are made through. And morality, I think, asks of us to appeal to our highest values, of hopefully a common good, a social good. But I think what we often see is that there are folks who have very different sets of values, and some of those are not moral. So I think always it does end up being some sort of conversation of consciousness, the decisions, because without resources, the actions can't take place. So that's my thought on it. Yeah.
So my experience with budgets is also that spectrum of from the nonprofit to local government. Prior to coming to the county, I was the executive director of an organization called Open Arms Perinatal Services, and we provided support to low-income pregnant people and their families before the babies were born. We attended their births with them, and then we stayed for up to 2 years. And we always said with Open Arms, actually, that the latest idea in childbirth is 3,000 years old. It's wrapping community around people. One of the stands that I took very strongly as an executive director was that my budget would reflect the values of the organization. And this led to some very unpopular decisions that I made with my board. There were certain times when we were offered fairly large donations from people who did not share the values of our organization, and we didn't accept those donations. That was a really big decision as a struggling nonprofit. There are places where it intersected where it didn't intersect enough with the values that we were trying to perpetuate and the change we were trying to create in the world for children and families, for us to be able to ethically and with integrity accept those donations. So that was one thing. And income made a very strong decision about what we couldn't accept. We had a very broad range of what we could, don't get me wrong, but there were very specific what we couldn't. And then there was the other side of the budget that was also unpopular with our funders, which is that I was committed to paying a living wage to all of my staff and employees. And I was committed to providing benefits to all of my staff. The staff at Open Arms are almost exclusively women and female-identified people, and very much a younger generation of childbearing women. So some of them with partners and some of them without partners. We made a conscious decision to offer part-time and full-time work so we could be flexible with people. But the decision I made 8 years ago was to never hire anyone for less than $20 an hour, because we knew that the cost of living in King County was that 8 years ago. It's far higher now, so our $15 minimum wage doesn't even get us to cost of living, just so that you know. But we did the analysis, and every year we tried to keep up with the analysis that was telling us what is the cost of living for a single parent with a child or two trying to live near the place that they work. As you can imagine, with funders, they looked at my dollars and they would think that that was an inflated budget, that maybe we're spending too much time on ourselves. So it really became an opportunity to teach that value about how do you keep staff, how do you take care of your staff so that your staff can take care of the people that they're serving. How do you assure that we can start pushing on a system that makes it really difficult for nonprofits to offer benefits, and for then people who work for nonprofits to maintain the health and well-being that they need to maintain in order to be providing the services that they provide. So those are some very concrete examples, but that really pushed the organization to try and think about the budget as a reflection of the values that we held as an organization, and the vehicle through which we could live out those values. I have also worked for local government, both the City of Seattle and now King County. At the City of Seattle, I worked for the County Council as a legislative aide years ago, 20 years ago. I was a legislative aide for Richard Conlon for his first time out the gates. And then I worked at our Human Services Department as a strategic advisor, advising on the budget as well, to assure that what we were trying to do at the Human Services Department actually had the funding in order to accomplish that goal. I feel like at Best Starts for Kids, that's very much what I do, and I've taken that idea of the dollars that we have as levy dollars, which means those are the people's dollars. I actually think all of government dollars are the people's dollars because it's taxes, right? So I'm constantly saying every day, of the people, by the people, for the people. That's who we work for, you guys. That's what government is. So our budget needs to reflect the fact that it's people's dollars that they have invested in us, and we need to show that we're good guardians and stewards of those dollars. So the aspect I would talk about in terms of Best Starts and budgeting, my putting together strategies with our team and attaching dollars to that, so there's some budgeting involved in that, was to have an intensive community engagement process where we ask the community, what should we be doing for children and youth and families within our communities? And once you hear that from community, then your dollars have to follow that. And that's where that comes through. Being able to be a good steward of that meant that when it went through a legislative process, I spent hours and hours and hours with our county council talking to them about this is why we're trying to accomplish this goal, and this is why it's going to cost that money to do it. So being a good advocate to be able to constantly stay on this is why, what we're trying to accomplish, and this is the only way we're going to make it. Now, the thing that I would say in terms of values is that there's always compromise involved, particularly when you have 9 legislators that you're working with and an executive, and then lots of community input. So there's always compromise. What I would say around values, and I was just talking to staff about this today, I believe that there are, on any decision, if you're lucky, you've got 2 to 5 good ways that you could go, and you've got to pick one. So compromise happens with, if I were queen of the world, this is what I would do, but I can live with these other 5, so if that's what it becomes, that's what it becomes. The living your values is that 1 or 2 or 50 really bad ideas, and you actually can't compromise and go in those directions, and that's where the fight needs to happen, not on the potential that these ones could work, but on this place where, as you mentioned, that sometimes people's values are not moral, and they may be trying to put that into a budget, and those are the things where you nearly have to stand firm on, I believe. So,
I think you pretty much covered budget as a moral document. Yeah. Same question.
Yes, thank you. So my experience with budgets is a little bit different than the other 2 folks on the panel. What my experience is working with communities so that we can reimagine our state budget as a resource for community-based programs, and to reimagine our state budget as if we were planning to invest in communities so that all communities thrive. Currently, right now, everything is calculated on dollars, what we don't have and what we do have. But what is it going to take for us to reimagine a state budget where we actually invest in communities instead of looking at where we cut funding for the programs that communities need? And so I really applaud the Best Starts program, because the way that they invest in community-based programs and programs that are really coming from the folks who are most impacted by issues, I feel like that is a model that we can take to the state level to really look at our state budget and how we're utilizing those tax dollars that come from us.
All right, and what are your thoughts about budget as a moral document?
Yes, much of what has already been said. I think that it's very important that when we create budgets, especially the state budgets, that our morals should be reflected into what we're investing in. And right now, what we see in Washington is that we're in a crisis where we're pitting programs and institutions against each other that communities rely on. And so when we're not using our budget as a morale and using that as our guiding star, then we start cutting into things that our communities need, and then that creates problems. So the sooner that we can get our state budget in line with something similar to what Best Starts is doing, I think we can really start to see what using such a big resource such as the state budget for a morale would look like in our state.
And that just leads to the second question, is how does morality play into mandatory spending? And then that's the second part of that question is, how does morality play into discretionary spending? Yeah, so whoever wants to go first on that is talk about morality and mandatory spending.
Yeah, I can tell a budget nerd wrote this question because these are terms, it's very interesting in my experience, and this is true of any institution, right? We talk about the same things, but depending on which institution you're in, we use different language to describe the same things, right? So there was I don't remember what the term was at the city, but in nonprofit, we call it carryover dollars, right? It's an assumption of what you'll spend. Something happens, you don't spend it all. Usually, hopefully it's for a happy reason. And then you carry those dollars over to the next year. It bolsters the continuation of the work into the next year. And the city had a completely different term for that. And for a while, folks were talking about it, and I was like, I don't know what you're talking about. And then when they said it, I was like, oh, carryover dollars. So it was just translating it. And these terms, mandatory and discretionary, are, I think, these institutional terms that are described and used, right? And what's interesting about them is that actually they aren't as rigid as one would imagine. I have seen, especially in governance processes, things that are mandatory in certain respects, that there are always workarounds when needed. That often can come up. Some things will be something in a discretionary category, sometimes when processes might make an outcome different than one would expect. And so I don't tend to think in these terms rigidly. And the reason I try not to think in these terms rigidly is that some of the systems that we have put ourselves in and the sort of rigidity that we have put ourselves in, I think has sacrificed the outcomes that we want to gain. And so some of these things around mandatory funding are necessary. And then some of them don't actually serve us anymore. And when we put them in categories of it being mandatory and don't ask ourselves, is this something that served us at a certain point but no longer serves us, and could those dollars serve us somewhere else? I think we can find ourselves actually in a place where we aren't putting our moral best forefront in the thought process. And so that's really, I think, a consideration I would have. My question, and again, it's because I think the kind of work I was fostered in was always about community outcomes and community-driven solutions. And so the questions were always oriented from those communities most impacted. So we always started from the end goal and worked our way backwards. If the end goal was to make sure every child is born healthy and every mother goes home and feels accomplished and that she can care for her child, then you work backwards from that about what services do they need, who do they need to surround themselves by. And then when you work your way backwards, that should be the way you're determining the line of what the budget is and how it will be spent and what is mandatory in that and what is discretionary. A great example, I think, in a moment right now for us, in a conversation that is all-consuming in many places, is the question of what housing is going to look like in our city right now. And I think the MHA, which is our mandatory housing affordability standard, is an example where a process started with community, and what the deficit and need was really clearly outlined, but the solution on the other side and where that spending is going does not match the scale of the problem by even 100th or 1,000th fold. So what we have found ourselves after a 3-year process on the other side is a city that we're living in where the average estimates of displacement are 150 to 175 people per month. And that includes families, that includes neighbors I know who have found themselves displaced from the city. And what we have is a solution that's slated to hopefully build 6,000 units over a decade. That is not at the scale of the problem. That is something where somehow in the process, this thing of mandatory and the constraints and you can spend dollars here but you can't spend dollars there weakened the solution over time. And I think we have to be careful of that if we're going to make moral decisions.
I would add that there is an element of power dynamics in all of this. Who had the power to set up some of those systems to begin with? How is that being looked at now? How is the community being given power to have impact on that? And in the end, who gets to have that final stamp of decision of, we can't do this? Usually the system is working to maintain itself, right? We all learn that in, Organizations 101. The institution and the system will work to maintain itself, which includes working to make sure that those power dynamics stay in place and that the people who get to make those final decisions are in those positions to that. So I don't want to underestimate that even as we can talk about budgets as moral documents, that we also have to talk about budgets as power tools to implement or not implement certain policies.
Thinking about this issue at the state level, I think that the state budget brings up a different set of problems when we get into mandatory and discretionary. When we look at kids and K through 12 education, with K through 12 education being in the mandatory funding side, but social services not being in the mandatory side, we put children into silos instead of looking at kids as a whole person. When we get so focused on fully funding K through 12 education and then cut the budget of social services, we're not thinking about those kids having a safe and warm place to lay their head at night, or if they're going to school hungry or not. Are we investing in the programs that are looking at the child as a whole versus looking at them in silos in education and housing and food? And so I think with the state budget, we run into a different set of problems around mandatory and discretionary, but at the end of the day, we need to be thinking how the system has created that setup. I think similar to what was expressed here already.
I just wanted to chime in on that because I think that what you all were talking about also is part of the structure to make sure that the system perpetuates itself. And all the work that you all are doing is that you're pushing on this system that has been so ingrained, and that it does have the silos, and it does decide who's worthy and who's not worthy, and to pit groups of people in need against one another is almost, almost unconscionable, and that's really what's happening, and it's been happening. It's just, I think it's just part of the American way that we have not been able to dig that up, to be able to let that root shine a little longer, bring it up so people can understand that you can put a lot of effort in, and at the end of the day, the other side, who's entrenched, still wins. So yeah, I thank you for that, yeah. All right, and they said now there's two sides to a budget equation, income and expenditures. Can a moral end be applied to both sides of that equation? Why or why not? And what does that look like? Wow, we should have some algebra here. Is any algebra teachers here? I mean, let's get this equation. I mean, I know it's some retired algebra teachers here. I know it is. Or arithmetic teachers. We need that equation, right? Right. All right, so who wants to take that one first?
Yes, it can be. And I spoke to this a little bit in talking about my agency. I think when we're talking about governments, local, city, county, state, certainly your tax structure is your revenue source, and how you set that up is completely reflective of the values and the morals that you have. Very interesting, because Washington State really does not have a good tax structure, right?
Right.
What is that reflecting? What values does that reflect? I do believe that unless we consciously make intentional decisions, that we just keep doing the same thing that was bad for us.
Right.
I actually do believe that that's the case, and that it could be that folks have not thought deeply enough when they put our tax structure in place. Each change that piles on top of the others. That's a neutral stand on that, but that's an example of how we look at our revenue. And then certainly your budget, particularly at a state level, is going to reflect at all levels, what are you valuing? I think one of the things that has come to a head in this country, and we're seeing it at the federal level, is two different thoughts. And I don't necessarily think that it's immoral, but the application of it is immoral. We have a group of people that our founding fathers put in place that believed, government is infrastructure and defense, and everything else should be nonprofits and churches. And then we have this other perspective that says, if we're paying into the system, we actually want to make sure that we take care of the people who are within society, and taking care is bigger than just infrastructure and defense. So those could possibly be value neutral kind of ways of being in terms of morality. You can think that. Now, if you are going to stand in this side that says government is only about infrastructure and about defense, then you build a budget and policies that encourage churches, that encourage nonprofits, that allows them to, and individual donors to build the wealth that we need to run a system of human services. We've never done that in this country. We've never done that. So we have a group of people that believe that, but have never done the second part that needs to be done in order to take care of each other. So that's something. Where the morality comes in, I believe, is the idea that you brought up earlier about who is worthy and who is not worthy, who is deserving and who is not deserving. And that's the piece that our English forebears brought to this country around the deserving and the undeserving poor. Elizabethan poor laws, all of that kind of stuff got implemented in this country, and those are moral choices to decide that some human beings are worth more than other human beings. Those are moral choices, and when you build them into the way that your institutions run and the way that you say that you can serve or not serve, and then you budget for that, then you've come into your moral dilemma, I believe, in your budget.
So I absolutely believe that you can apply morality to both the income and how you spend it. Unfortunately, that's not what we're doing here in Washington. Here in Washington, we have the most regressive tax code in the country. We have the most upside-down tax code, meaning that those who make the least pay the most, and those who make the most pay the least. If you make under $21,000, you're paying up to 17% of your income into state and local taxes. But if you're making over $500,000 a year, you're only paying 2.4% of your income into state and local taxes. So that means the folks at the top are not putting in their fair share, and those who are at the bottom are paying way more than their fair share. And so what we need to do is to flip that. And when we look at the communities who are most impacted by the upside-down tax code, communities of color are disproportionately being overtaxed in our state. In addition to that, we lack the revenue to really invest in the communities who are most impacted by our upside-down tax code, and also invest in programs that these communities have created to address the problems that are happening in those communities. And so while we should be doing that, unfortunately, we're not here in the state of Washington, and it's something that we need to change and that we can change.
Yeah, it's interesting to me. I think on some level we have to have sort of a consciousness about what capitalism is, and the mythology of capitalism, and mythologies that are woven to explain economics of a system that aren't actually true, but are now woven in such a way that people assume they are true. So some of those givens say that supply and demand is the main driver of whether or not something is viable, and that market is a free market. Even that term, a free market, does not acknowledge that there are manipulations of the market that are advantageous to some and disadvantageous to others. And this question of income and expenditure is something that always comes up to Sheila's point for nonprofits and governance, and is never of concern for-profit in our country, right? And so I talk about this a lot in places, the unachievable perfection expected of any spending in nonprofits and governance. In for-profit business, it is assumed that you will fail 99 times until you hit on that winner. And once you hit on the winner, you're golden, because the market will then propel you into a wonderfulness. In both governance and nonprofits, you're given one shot. And if you are led by a woman or a brown person, maybe half a chance to exceed the expectations that are put on you by some outside force that doesn't actually know the realities in which you work in, often. And if you fail at that, every effort that has been put in, instead of looking and reflecting, how do we improve on what we learned from that experience, and isn't failure part of getting to the other side, everything is taken away and it's put somewhere else. And what we constantly find ourselves then is in a place where the income side is always at jeopardy. We are always in a state of scarcity and always responding in that stance. We can't be authentic with our conversations for fear that something will be taken away if you're actually honest about what the limitations and challenges are, even though we should know that humans are at work and that's inherent in the work. So for me, that comes down to a really critical critique that we have to look at about our system. And I think it comes from these fallacies we tell ourselves. Most people, when you ask them how the economy works and you say trickle down, they assume that's the way the economy works. Trickle down is not real. That's not a real thing. And it wasn't real to the point where when you hear Ronald Reagan say it, every time he said it, he had to define it for us. When you hear the early use of it by Republicans, they would say trickle down and they'd explain what it was, because it was a mythology being woven. Now you say trickle down, people know what it is and they assume it's true. And we're seeing it reflected in the federal tax code now. I was born and raised in rural Missouri, which is very close to Kansas. And NPR did a wonderful piece this last week about Kansas, which it was a small example of what is now happening with our tax code on the federal level. And what happened to that state is detrimental, yes. Hugely detrimental. Mm-hmm. Their estimate is it's going to take about 3 decades to undo the damage that was done in about 5 years due to that tax code in that state. And this was a state that was already well underwater in many regards. And what it was a starving of the income side. Right? It was a starving of the resources that you have to actually do public good. One of the things I did when I was on the city council, I was approached by a council member there, and they asked me, would you be open to a taxation bill being introduced during the budget season? And I asked about the specifics of it, and once I heard how sound it was, I was like, absolutely. And a lot of folks were surprised by that. Folks who know me wouldn't be surprised by that, because I work in nonprofits and funding, and I know you can't do good work without money. And you can't do good work without good people getting a good living wage. And you can't do good work without programs having the funding they need to do the work, and good people surrounding them asking, how did you do it, and how do we make it better, and how do we make it better for everyone? And so for me, that income side is a really important question we have to ask about in this country. And the way that we choose to generate our income is a moral question, and then whether or not we're going to actually invest it where it belongs on the expenditure side is the moral question.
All right. I just wanted to add just a little bit here. America has been at war 222 years since 1775. And from 1935 to 1940, during the Depression, it was no war. But in between all of that time, it's been a war. So the money has been going into a war effort right in front of our faces. And so it is continuing to do that. So how can we actually think about peace as an item that pays? Since they seem to think war does, and that's where the money goes. Anyway, it's something to think about spending and the inequality. Like I said, I grew up in a time when it was absolutely inequality. It was nothing coming back to my community. And if you go across the country today, you still see that. You still see big pockets of places where communities are still taxed, and they don't get any of the revenue to come back to them. And so what we're listening to our panel discussion is that they just have some good ideas that they've been working on and had some good results with the experience that they've had. And so I think that you have some cards there, and after a while we're gonna maybe write questions on those cards. So for the next part of this dialogue that we have here. All right, now, can you apply a moral lens to a budget when you have insufficient income to cover the necessities? That's what Dr. King said. It was an insufficient check that was given to us back in 1963. So anyway, I think this is interesting.
I believe that you definitely need to apply a moral lens, or else you'll have what's happening at our state budget level where we're pitting necessities against each other. And we see how that's impacting specifically the mental health institutions and the lack of services that they're able to provide when you pit necessities against each other.
I absolutely do think you can apply a moral lens to an insufficient budget. Nonprofits do it all the time. It's the main way we build complex budgets. And the way you do that is that you look for those opportunities where something can be scaled down. And you also look, if you're really savvy and in solidarity with others, you look for opportunities for collaboration. And that happens more and more. And for any organization or group that works in community, it's sometimes the only way to get to the other side because of really the cycles of scarcity that we have in our culture around really important and good work. And the other thing that we should be thinking through in those moments is why is it insufficient in the first place? And that's a question, again, that I think structurally we have to keep going back to that base question. Why would there be insufficiencies for things like people having school books? Why would that be an insufficiency? Why is it that we have to have a PTA structure for basics? Why would there be an insufficiency at people being able to be healthy? Right? Like these seem like we talk about these things as if they're these huge radical movements, but they're really very simple requests that shouldn't be requests at all. They should be basic understandings of what we should have sufficiencies of. You know what Jackie has described, what we have in Washington State without a basic income tax, and mind you, we are one of only 7 states in the country that do not have a basic income tax. When you're talking about progressive revenue and what sufficiency in revenue looks like, it is the most progressive, it is the IRS's standard of a progressive tax standard. It's literally in the definition of a progressive tax for the IRS. They're like, for instance, an income tax, which is a averaged percentage that applies equally across all people, but those who have more pay more in dollars because that percentage is more out of more money, right? They state that as the standard of a progressive tax. But somehow here in Washington State, that basic is always insufficient. And what that has meant is that every year, we are about $2.4 billion behind on what we need for basic public education. That is not just impacting children, that is not just impacting families, that's impacting every person in this room and every person in this state. And that should be a non-negotiable. It should never be that there is an insufficiency for that. So we have a lot of soul searching to do, I think, in this country when it comes to this question.
The only thing I would add, because I agree with everything that you all have said, part of one of the things that we have in this state that a lot of states do not have is we have some very, very, very wealthy residents of Washington State, like the wealthiest in the world.
We won't name names.
We do, and one of the things that's very interesting about a lot of those folks who live in our state is that they do want to see right done by the people of Washington State. So we're at a really unique opportunity then to make some really good changes for the people in this state and maybe lead the way in what happens on a federal level, and to be able to partner in ways that are fairly unique. Now, our state has kind of led the way in public-private partnerships, and that is something, when I was first involved, I was very much like, government needs to be providing for this. This needs to happen, and I thought it was going to melt that commitment down. It hasn't, and so now I'm more of a fan of public-private partnerships. But to give an example of that, doing the morally right thing with an insufficient income is the years that this state has spent around home visiting for people who have just had babies. And we had an insufficient system to be able to take care of folks. Now, if you have a baby in any other country that's comparable to the United States, a nurse comes to your house after you have the babe, make sure everything is going okay. They may keep coming for a little while to make sure your family's off to a good start if you're having issues. United States, we don't do that. You're in, you have your babe, you got to go home immediately. Hope you have somebody there that can take care of you. When things go horribly wrong, we'll come back, right? We don't have that idea of promoting health and well-being. So a few years back, there was a public-private partnership that said, we want to see home visiting happening in Washington State. We're going to donate private dollars, we're going to match them with state dollars, and we're going to try and influence the feds to contribute dollars to home visiting. This was years' worth of work. We now have, hopefully will continue. Under the Obama administration, we had the what's called MICV, and I cannot tell you what the acronym is for that. It's maternal and infant, and home visiting is in there. Dollars that were created to give to states to be able to provide home visiting services for folks who were without community and without people that could help them when their babies came home. So you had a private funder say, let's pair this with state dollars, let's show how it's done, let's make sure the feds contribute their dollars. Washington State has a fairly robust home visiting program now that is different than what's happening in most of the state. So that is making a moral decision. We want to provide for new babies and their grown-up people, and we need to figure out a way to put that into our budget to make it work. And there's all these different prongs, and now we've got these funding sources to be able to fund that. That's in jeopardy now, so today the news is not so fabulous, but if I had been talking to you 2 years ago, rah, we did this, we managed to keep it there. To me, that's the next question, is not necessarily can we make these decisions, but when you bring that power question in, when you have a federal government that's threatening to shut down other state governments in particular ways because they're not complying with the way that the federal government wants to do what they want to do, we're in a dangerous position. So we cannot ignore power in that way. We absolutely cannot.
Yeah, I agree that we cannot ignore power. One of the quotes that Dr. King said was about being an outside agitator. And he says, anyone who lives inside the United States can never be considered an outsider anywhere within its bounds. So I thought that was a good quote for the time that we're in right now, because it's a lot of people that's living inside the America. And the other thing, too, is that all of the structures that you were talking about is based on somebody else being the other. Mm-hmm. And the other is the one that's not well-liked, has a problem, whether it's race or class. I mean, if we were in the Appalachians, it would be West Virginia, it would be class. And those people would be experiencing the same thing that you were talking about here. And so here it would be race and class and the other. And so how do you have a moral lens when the income is insufficient and you're dealing with race and class? And I don't think we've actually handled that piece yet, because that's one of the elephants that's in the room that, if this was a homogeneous country, then all the things that we're discussing today would be a given. I mean, Norway, I don't think they want to come to America. They have everything they need in Norway. Yeah, the education system is fine, and they have to have good housing, because I don't think they have a lot of sunshine in Norway, right? So that means they have to have a lot of heat. I bring brevity and joy and laughter to everything we do. That makes our work go easier, because these ladies, we're doing hard work, and so I bring a little joy in between so that we can have laughter. All right. So that's just how I really roll in the world. I hope it's okay. All right. So have you applied morality to your personal budgeting? If so, can you share concrete examples? My pocketbook is empty, so.
It's easy to be moral when
Yeah, I have insufficient funds. All right, so who wants to tackle that one?
Yeah, I mean, I'll tackle this. It's interesting, this thing of morality and personal budgeting. I haven't always worked in the philanthropic side of nonprofits. That's only been the last 5 years of my career, and I came into it at first doing a giving circle for Social Justice Fund. And folks who don't know Social Justice Fund, they do a really unique model where they bring everyday people together and they fundraise together towards a common goal for social good. And I remember they did an activity with us. It was like the second day we were all together. You have about a dozen folks who've chosen to all be there together around a certain goal in giving. And they were like, tell me about philanthropy in your life. And I grew up in rural Missouri, the oldest of 4 kids, with parents, you know, we didn't have money. I was like, philanthropy? I don't know anything about philanthropy. But what happened is you would talk to other people, and we were all having these conversations. And what I realized is those of us who didn't give of dollars, which is how we think of philanthropy, we gave of our time. And that was just a given in my family. We gave of our time. So we did it through church, and we did it through community. We gave of our time. And as you gain resources, you can now do that in a monetary way, right? If you don't have, often people with resources have less time, but they can give through dollars. That gives someone else the opportunity to give through time. My husband and I, we don't make a lot of money. We both work in nonprofits, but in the way that I grew up in a tithing faith, still we do tithing, and what we now do is we make decisions together as a family about where we're gonna steer our dollars towards public good, and we put some in C4 political work, because we're like, yeah, we wanna make sure that some folks are agitating in that level, and we give some in C3 space to make sure the good work that we think community needs is supported. And to Sheila's point, we need to put our dollars in the action in places that we need it to happen. So that's a lot of the kind of decisions we make morally, and in conversations between my husband. My first grader now has some opinions too, so we're bringing her in the mix to figure that out.
About 20 years ago, somebody, and I don't know who it was, had a PSA called a campaign called Give 5 hours a week,
Right.
give 5% of your income, and there was something else. I can't remember what it was. It was more than 20 years ago because I was in my 20s, and that was more than 20 years ago. But being in my 20s and married young, that was something that my husband and I started doing. And we at that time, were able to both give 5 hours a week and 5% of our income. We have always given 5% of our income now. It's half a tithe. So that has increased as we have increased. That gets challenged because now I have 3 teenagers, and looking at college and looking at retirement and looking all of these things, it becomes more of a moral choice. Back then it was the right thing to do. Now it's a moral choice because if you're taking 5% away when you actually need some of those dollars, how do you rebalance what it is that you're doing? So that's a concrete example of giving away. We've discovered that if we kind of budget at the beginning for that 5% to go away, then we can create our budget based on what's left. And I actually believe if you have children that your decision to feed them and clothe them and give them good opportunities, good moral budgeting right there.
So, yes.
We look at providing opportunities for our kids in the summer, and we have been privileged to have them have wonderful education opportunities, and all of those things to me is what budgeting around morality is. That means as parents, you know, I park up under the freeway and I walk 20 minutes to work every day because to park in the county garage is $25 a day, and I can't do it. So I walk for 20 minutes in order to make that work. I would take transit, but I also have to run carpool in the morning, so I have to have my car. So those kinds of decisions are constantly being made of who, once you give to your community, then who do you give to, and then how do you make adjustments in what you spend in order to do that. My children also, starting from the time that they were around 10, at the end of every year, they each get to choose an organization that they want to give dollars to. And it's been really interesting to watch them build that idea of what their values are and what their morals are, and therefore what organizations do they want to support. My eldest, who is a way over-the-top tech geek, beyond anything that I understand, tends to really donate according to his values, organizations I would never have given money to. And yet that's been a remarkable thing to watch that development and saying, put my money where my mouth is. This is what I value, so this is what I'm giving. So.
And there's other ways that we can do this as well, in addition to donating and through philanthropy, thinking about how we spend our money. For example, when I think about going out to eat or things like that, like making sure that I tip well, because not only are you putting money into somebody's pocket, but like that money goes back into the economy and it benefits all of us. So I think that the morality and the philanthropy, it goes both ways, that if we all chip in, we make the community stronger. And there's lots of different ways that you can do that, and it benefits everyone.
And one of the ways that I look at my spending or my budget, or money that I put into the community, is that I researched ALEX, and that's the American Legislative Exchange Council, that I was really there in Florida and all the other communities with the Stand Your Grounds, and every corporation in America was part of ALEX after Trayvon Martin, except for Costco and Starbucks. They all pulled out now and started another secret organization. But so I make a conscious choice that I don't spend money with a lot of those companies that was part of ALEX, because they're working every day in every state to put laws on the book that are going to harm us. An example of that, the ALEX just supported in Alabama the other day, the Alabama legislation to try all 17-year-olds as adults. That's what they just did. So I got that list. I don't buy anything that the Koch brothers make. So I have a list of things, and that's how I do my other conscious spending, is looking at where I spend my money and how it does it that way. I think that you want to come up and. Okay, let me see if I can read them. Okay, well, number one is that. Let me collect a few more. Oh, okay. The first question is, how do we address budget morality within the dishonest legislators on an organizing scale? How do we address that?
Say that again.
How do we address budget morality within dishonest legislation on an organizing scale? And otherwise, I guess, how do people organize against the dishonest people who got elected in the State House? And, yeah.
So I'm asking specifically around the tax levy, or the property tax levy around the youth jail, and that they're taking like 9 years post the amount of money that's supposed to be taking. So like how do we organize around that?
Yeah, this is interesting, and we've already seen some examples, I think, of organizing around the budget. Block the Bunker was hugely successful, utilizing the budget process to organize. They used that moment where $160 million was slated to build a police precinct on the north end that was a militarized space. To not only ask, why are we spending these dollars in this way, but also open up a conversation, and while we're at it, why are we policing in this way, and is this the way we want policing to happen, right? So there was a context that started around a dollar amount on a building. There was a much bigger context on where we are morally and what decisions we're making. And the same thing is happening with the No New Youth Jail, which is extraordinarily sophisticated campaign and is working on multiple levels. And so what that's looked like is folks showing up in county and city chambers en masse and saying to the folks they elected and who served them, hey, is this the way we want to spend our dollars? And there has to be, I think, in morality, a consistency, right? And the consistency in morality is that spending of the dollars or allocation of dollars is an action in the moral stance you take. So for the city council to take a stance that they want 0 youth detention in our city, and then having to think through in a moral budget decision, what moral budget decision gets you closest to 0 youth incarceration? Supporting a youth jail and funding it, or not supporting a youth jail and funding it? That's a pretty easy equation to put together if you say that this is your moral statement. in another legal process. So what's happened now with the No New the No New Youth Jail campaign is that the lawsuit they brought forward was actually looking at the underpinning of the status of the law and what mechanisms were going to be used to fund the institution of the youth jail. What's extraordinarily common in city budgets for capital campaigns is that they actually borrow against bonds or other future assumptions of revenue that will be earned to build something in the moment. So often the debt of that is way far into the future. And what happened with the way that this particular policy was written up is that there was a certain term put on the repayment schedule that actually the reality of it far exceeds that term. And so there's actually an appeal process right now in court where it's going to be determined whether or not that's legal. And to me, there's a bigger question there of how much scrutiny and accountability and transparency do we need to build as people if we think of the people we elect as stewards of our money, which the way I totally agree that's what it should be. What do we need to do around generally transparency and budgeting processes so we understand things? No more coded language. Don't say mandatory discretionary. Like, talk to me like it was my checkbook, because it is my checkbook, right? And so it opens up those processes. And part of it is that we have to utilize all the tools. I mean, No New Youth Jail is doing that. They're utilizing organizing in place and visibility of people. They're utilizing the courts. They're utilizing all the tools at our disposal. And I think that's how we just keep doing it. We just have to keep it visible in people's minds and keep talking to people who don't know about it. Because most people, when you talk about it, they're shocked. Well, that's not what we're supposed to be doing. That's not where our moral compass is. And then they can join and have ideas and share with the folks who can make change what they think actions that align with our moral compass should look like.
Yes, and to piggyback off of what Kirsten has talked about, I think the No New Youth Jail campaign is a really great example of what it looks like to change power dynamics and accountability and stop working from a place of deficit so that we can actually reinvest tax dollars, our dollars, into programs that communities have created, into community-based solutions as well.
All right, another question, I think you might have touched on it already, is what if people could direct their tax dollars to services they prefer? What would that change? It's almost like United Way. You can. So if you paid your taxes, if they had a box at the city that says, I want this to go to human service only, like sometimes when you tie it to the church, you can say for youth service, the youth church or whatever. So I mean, I think that would be it would be a cool idea, Yeah. Go ahead.
I'm probably going to answer that differently than you.
No,
I'm
that's
not
fine.
sure that it would be a cool idea.
Okay, that's okay.
Mostly because if you do that, then everybody gets to do that. And not everybody is coming from a place of making their decisions in the what's best for everyone else. So I think that we have to be very, very careful when we think about wanting to have that kind of control over our dollars, because again, everyone does then, and then we have to butt heads. One of the things that I think is built into our system is conflict and needing to really put our heads together and work through it. And I don't think that we have the commitment or the equal power to be able to get involved in it in the way that we do. So rather than creating control in a different way, which will privilege some people over others, and which creates a different level of conflict, I think we need to figure out how to engage and shift power dynamics around on the system that we've got in what is supposed to be everyone has a vote, everyone has a say. Again, government of the people, by the people, for the people, and government being stewards of the community's dollars.
Yeah, and I also think this is a well-intentioned idea, but in some level it ignores that there are inherent power dynamics, and currently the folks with the most power are not interested in the public good for most people right now. It's just the reality. So, and it also feeds into something I'm seeing happening around taxation. We have right now, I'll be honest, it's a regressive tax, it is, but the sweetened beverage tax, right? And so the sweetened beverage tax is an excise tax. So what does that mean? It's a tax on ounces of sugar. It's a proportionality tax around overly sweetened beverages. But that tax is put on business, right? So an excise tax means the business incurs the tax. But what I'm seeing, and I don't know if you've noticed this, and this is happening more and more as taxation is happening, is I'll get a receipt or I'll see a sign. And so I literally went to a restaurant with my children. We were sitting down, and they gave me this piece of paper that said 78 cents of your bill or whatever, because we had soda, because I like soda, and is for the sweetened beverage tax. And I'm like, great. I know what that's going into is early childhood development and youth programs and healthy food programs. But what it said is, if you don't like this extra tax, call your city council and tell them, right? And so what I did is I asked my servers to come over, and I was like, where's this note from? Where'd this note come from? Oh, I'm not sure. And I said, well, get your manager out here. I want to chat with them. Because I wanted to know. I was like, who made the decision to do it? And what I said to them is, I was like, this is an excise tax. Tell me who to call, because I need them to know, if you as a business decide to then tax me as the consumer, what you are charged as a business, that's your decision, not the city council's decision. And if you're going to make a statement about it, I also want to see a statement beside it about what those tax dollars are going to be doing and how it's helping the public good. And so I'm a nerd. I did call the boss back, and I did talk about it. But that's the nuance of an understanding of those dollars and the kind of decisions that are made that I think we need to talk about. And the reason I worry about I get to choose where my tax dollars go down to granular is that if we don't have an elevated conversation about the conflicts of things, people never complain when the taxes are for clearing up a pothole in the street, and they always complain about when it's people, and maybe people they want to other, who don't look like them. Yeah. Those are the nuance of the kind of conversations with public good and dollars that happen, because it's much easier for everyone to agree to fill a pothole on a street. It's much more complicated to have really complex and needed conversations about what it is to heal a whole culture and people. And we just, the only way through the struggle is to go through the struggle together. That's the only way through it, so.
There's another question here that says, how does morality change as time? No, does morality change as time, with the times? So.
Good question.
I'm not sure if morality changes with the times or if it changes with those who are in power and who have the ability to decide how our budget is used as a moral document.
What do you mean by that? I like that. What do you mean by it?
Well, thinking about like who's in power and the organizing that's happening to influence people that are in power, that things might not have gotten better because of time. I think it's because of the work that people are doing to make those outcomes happen.
Yeah, I think that values change over time, but I think there's got to be something consistent about morality and our commitment to and responsibility for each other is a strong moral that changes with different ways that people reflect their values. I think that we are living in a time where, I'm just going to state it bluntly, I believe that we have a leader in this country who understands very deeply how to use fear to cause people to turn against one another. And that is what challenges people's morality. And they hide behind saying, this is my value, I value this, or I value this, or I value this, but it undermines any sense of morality in all of that. And we have a leader who's very effective at using fear and doubt in that way.
Yeah, I agree with that. I mean, fear, why Franklin Delano Roosevelt said, fear, what is there to fear but fear itself? And so now I have an element where people are so afraid, and they're so afraid of the other, and the other has always been here. I mean, that's just it. And so now the other has a spotlight on that other that has always been here. And I think that this is an opportunity for people of good faith and also of strong spiritual values to actually speak up. I mean, at this point, it's time to stand up before it won't be anybody to stand up later. So that's one of the things that I think that we can work on to change the morality and to change our ideas about extending compassion and mercy and justice for everyone. So I think we have another question here. Maybe we got time for one more question. Oh. All right, let's see here. All right. Well, the new jail is really popular, so how can this conversation be applied to the construction of the youth jail on 12th and older? I mean, it's really come up a lot, so I guess that'll be one of our last questions. You want to tackle it again?
I think how this discussion can be applied is first to really look at where we're directing resources and if that aligns with our morals. And I think for the majority of folks, hopefully here in this room and in Seattle, that it doesn't align with our morals to put children in cages and to treat them as less than human. But if we could actually redirect those funds and to put it into programs that are community-based solutions, that would align with our morals. And I think that's a perfect example of how the budget as a morale plays out.
All right, any more comments?
Yeah, I think it's interesting. We talk about institutions, and I think when we say that word, we think about buildings. But institutions are just people, groups of people moving in the same direction. And those directions can change, sort of tied to the previous question. It's interesting. Our moral code is intact all the time. And sort of what you find yourself is in reflection of something that maybe feels counter to what you think. And then when you check in with your moral self, you sometimes have to reconcile a bias you have or a misunderstanding you have. And that's really what morality calls us to, right? It calls us to a consciousness and reflection in a deep way over and over and over again. And with that, you evolve. And so the reason I think it feels like our morals change all the time is that the normalization of the evolution feels different on the other side. I think we're in a really unique moment right now in our city and our country for a lot of moral reflection. Yes. We are on a daily basis being asked, what is my instinct here, right? And the reason fear is motivating is it's instinctual. It pushes you out of what it is to pause and reflect and make sure and check with yourself if that's really the direction you want to move in. Fear motivates you usually to either freeze or fly, right? Or fight. Those are the three things you do in a fear state, but you don't reflect. And we have a moment to reflect. When it's easy to look back, and we just did, right? We have Martin Luther King Jr. Day, and we always look back, and there's always this celebration of the moment of what he is, which should be celebrated. But what we don't talk about is the pushback that he had in that moment. Yes. What we don't talk about is the reality that's happening right now, where 50% of people were telling him he was damn wrong, and he should stop what he was doing. And they thought it so much that he was murdered. Yes. And we don't talk about that, right? And that's the part we should be talking about, because that's the part that should motivate us for what it is to rise to the occasion in this moment. 50% of the people are always going to push back against the moral thing, is what we need to decide on. And what you do is you still evolve despite 50% of people feeling like they aren't ready to evolve. You just do it because it's the right thing to do. And we need to remind ourselves of that a lot right now, I think.
Well, this other question here, it just runs right into what you're talking about. Are any of you planning to run for office? And how can we support women of color running for office? So we'll end with that question. Yeah. Is any of you planning on running for office? And how can we support women of color running for office?
I just facilitated a session at City Hall, and someone asked this question, and Councilmember Gonzalez said, well, the first thing you can do to support women of color running for office is when they run, vote for them, and make sure everyone you know votes for them. Which I was like, that's a pretty clear-cut answer. Yeah, I mean, it's something I've been thinking about since the appointment. Me and my husband have talked about it. Campaigning is a really big deal, and I have a 6-year-old and a 2-year-old. And you know, someone very wise told me when someone campaigns, your whole family campaigns, and we have to make that decision as a family. I will say, coming from an organizing activism side to the decision-making side, I was bolstered by the fact the same way that Block the Bunker was showing up and holding folks accountable, the Housing for All Coalition is doing that right now around conversations of housing, and it's making a difference. And to be on the other side and witness what people showing up in democracy and raising their voices and being nonviolent but showing up every day and how it was changing and influencing decision makers was hugely motivating to think, oh, you can make change from the other side of it if community keeps showing up. So that was very motivating.
So I'm not actually going to answer directly that question, but I believe that we need to have people who are willing to affect change at all levels in government and doing all of the jobs. I am a policy advisor, strategic advisor. We need to have people that when communities comes and says, you can't do this and this is why, that someone in the government says, okay, we're going to listen to that, and now I'm going to push the system from the inside to figure out how are we going to move in that direction. And I think that there has been some amazing work done in the last year or two at a city and county level, because there's been people in government who have been able to push and listen, and there's been community coming forward and saying, we need you to do different. You need to act different. So whether it's as a politician, whether it's as a policy person, whether it's as someone who's actually implementing services and programs, we need to have folks who are working within our government who are reflecting our community. And we need to shift how a lot of our structure in that way works.
All right. Well, we want to. Nikki's going to come up and close this out, and we want to thank you all for being here. Number one, and we want to thank our panel. Thank you.
Thank you again so much for coming out. Thank you one last time. Another round of applause for our moderator and our panel. They were wonderful, right? Thank you. So before I dismiss everyone and set everyone free, I have a few quick announcements. First, if you are a new member in the League or are interested in being a new member with the League, there is a new member orientation on February 10th, which is a Saturday, and there's information in the back, or you can, 17th, not the 10th, it's the 17th, and you can talk to Allison or Stephanie about that. Also, the Social Justice Committee, of which I'm a co-chair, was really honored to be able to put on this panel. Thank you all for responding to our random emails. We would love for you all to attend our Social Justice Committee meetings. You do not need to be a League member to attend. We are having our next one Sunday, the 18th, from 3 to 4:30 p.m., and we're talking about the homes tax, probably, as well as other homelessness and affordable housing issues. We'll have Seattle-King County Coalition on Homelessness there, Low Income Housing Alliance, maybe someone to discuss the Fort Lawton redevelopment potentials. So we'll chat after the forum, maybe, on another presentation from you. And if you are interested in learning more about that committee, you can talk to the lovely twins who are hanging out with clipboards in the back. They will get your contact info so that we can reach out to you. If you want a try guide so that you know who to contact for all of your amazing new ideas about budgeting and what they should be doing with their money, it is in the back. Allison's got a ton. And finally, if you enjoyed this forum, please do not hesitate to give some money to the League of Women Voters so we can continue to put on educational forums like this, register people to vote, advocate for things that are really important to us and you. So there's a donation jar in the back. I know Allison is happy to take checks and cash. Now let's go sing happy birthday to the League. Or no, don't do that. But there is cake or a happy birthday. Yes, thank you for coming on your birthday. That's dedication. There is plenty of cake left. Please don't make us take cake home. Thank you, everyone. Networking and mingling time.
All right. Friday, you
No,
you're
I'm
down
gonna,
on a
I should
Friday.
get my,